priority will be to close the transaction, as I mentioned, ideally in May, certainly before the end of Q2. Complete the integration program that we have already developed, and then it will be to execute at speed.
Hello, you're watching Proactive. Joining me is Salvonis Therapeutics CEO, Anthony Tennyson. Anthony, very good to speak with you. 2024 was a transformative year for Salvonis. Can you take us through the highlights and how you repositioned yourself?
Indeed. Good to talk to you, Stephen. And you are correct. 2024 and so far in 2025 have together been transformative periods for Salvonis Therapeutics. If I look back to early 2024, Graft Polymer, as Salvonis Therapeutics used to be known as, was in a financially challenged position with an unclear strategy through a dual focus on industrial plastics and biotechnology. I joined the company in May, and we rapidly undertook a review of the business. We restructured the business to exit out of the underperforming industrial plastics segment and to focus solely on the what we believe to be much higher potential biotechnology segment, with a specific focus on mental health and addiction segments. And these are segments, Stephen, which have large addressable markets, poor current standards of care, and therefore significant unmet medical needs and commercial potential. We refinanced the business, and we raising 1.8 million sterling in July of last year, which provided us with the runway to develop and then laterally execute our growth agenda. And our growth strategy is focused on partnerships, joint ventures, and acquisitions, specifically in that high potential area of mental health and addiction treatment within the biotechnology or healthcare industry. We rebranded the company from Graft Polymer to Salvonis Therapeutics, speaking very clearly to our desire to solve for addiction and mental health. We've built a really strong industry-leading team in bringing in Dennis Purcell as our chairman, who is a leader in the biotechnology industry, having, when he worked in banking, been responsible for between 10 and $20 billion in financings across the biopharma industry. And we also brought in Professor David Nutt, who is acknowledged as a global authority in the development of treatments for mental health and addiction. And then we really began then focusing on our growth strategy, starting with a partnership with Awaken Life Sciences, which is a Canadian-based leading clinical stage biotechnology company focused again in our segments of mental health and addiction. And that partnership focused on developing a new treatment or a new range of medicines to treat trauma-related mental health disorders, such as post-traumatic stress disorder. And what's really important about post-traumatic stress disorder from a drug dev perspective is, although that condition and that indication affects 13 million Americans, there's no licensed medication. There's no medicine specifically licensed for the treatment of that debilitating disease. So we entered into a partnership with Awaken to develop a new class of medicines for treating post-traumatic stress disorder. We made rapid progress in that. And in fact, we got so comfortable with working with the team in Awaken that we've decided through the course of the year, we decided to acquire Awaken. And that really has been our focus, our core focus since then, is progressing towards the completion of the acquisition of Awaken. And for the audience today to understand a little bit about Awaken, they're a clinical stage biotech, as I mentioned. They've got 3 core programs, 2 focused on alcohol use disorder and 1 focused on PTSD, which is the joint venture currently with Salvonis. We're acquiring Awaken in an all-paper transaction for between 3 and 5 million sterling, depending upon the closing price of the shares at close. We've in Salvonis, to validate that acquisition, we retain the services of Pharma Ventures, a specialized M&A advisory shop in the UK. And they've said similar assets to the assets that we're acquiring would be valued would typically command deal valuations of multiples of what we're acquiring Awaken for. So if we're acquiring Awaken for between 3 and 5, their lead asset, which is in phase 3 for the treatment of alcohol use disorder, would typically command in the region of 60 million sterling in milestone, both signing and success payments, and significant double-digit royalties on lifetime net sales. And their secondary program focused on the US market for alcohol use disorder, because it's a much larger market, could typically command 150 million sterling in success signing and success milestones. And again, those significant double-digit milestones. So this transaction represents what we believe to be a significant opportunity for shareholder value creation for Salvonis' shareholders. So Stephen, it's been a busy year. We've restructured, refinanced, refocused, rebranded, built a team, and are now in the process of executing a transformational M&A. And we're aiming for that M&A to be completed ideally in May of this year, but certainly within Q2 of 2025.
Anthony, what progress has been made with Awaken's drug development pipeline?
Significant progress, Stephen, has been made in the last 12 to 18 months with Awaken's drug development pipeline, which is the pipeline that we are acquiring. Their lead program, as I mentioned, AWKN-001, targeting severe alcohol use disorder for the UK, EU markets. And they initiated a phase 3 trial with recruitment beginning in July of last year. That trial is progressing. It's targeted to complete in late 26, early 27, with a marketing authorization application being made in 27, and ideally being in market in the UK initially in 28, with the EU to follow. We have retained the services of Pharma Ventures within Salvonis Therapeutics to identify potential commercial partners for that asset, because Salvonis's business model is and will be to progress research to a certain point and then seek to out-license it at the appropriate valuation. So significant progress being made both in the execution of that program, but also now progressing towards a commercial strategy to bring value onto the balance sheet in the near term for Salvonis for that asset, subject to completion of the transaction. Awaken has a secondary program, as I mentioned before, AWKN-002, targeting moderate to severe alcohol use disorder for the much larger US alcohol use disorder treatment market. They had a successful pre-IND meeting with the FDA. And for the audience, essentially, that's where you discuss with the FDA, the competent authority in the US, your drug development and regulatory strategy. That meeting went well. The FDA was supportive of Awaken pursuing something called a 505(b)(2) pathway. Now, just for your audience, that means it's a much more efficient, rapid pathway. But very importantly, they've agreed that Awaken and soon Salvonis can cross-reference into Johnson & Johnson's blockbuster Spravato drug program, which means Salvonis and Awaken doesn't require to incur the costs of a preclinical program or a phase 1 program. They can just cross-reference into that data and get into the pathway at a much later stage for significantly lower cost in a much more efficient manner. So significant progress has been made in those 2 clinical stage programs owned by Awaken, but being acquired by Salvonis, with, as I mentioned, that acquisition targeted to complete in May of this year, and certainly before the end of Q2 this year.
So, apart from the completion of that acquisition, Anthony, what are your priorities for 2025?
Good question. Priority will be to close the transaction, as I mentioned, ideally in May, certainly before the end of Q2. Complete the integration program that we have already developed. And then it will be to execute at speed, but responsibly, those programs that I've mentioned before. So it will be about establishing the scientific bridge for the 002 program into J&J's Spravato. It will be developing a strategy for a phase 2b clinical trial for that 002 program, submitting an application to the FDA for that phase 2b program. And ideally, all of that will occur through the course of 2025, and then enabling us in 2026 to initiate a phase 2b program in the US for the 002 asset targeting moderate to severe alcohol use disorder. At the same time, it'll be to take forward the work of Awaken in that lead program, the 001 program, executing the phase 3 program, the trial, in conjunction with Awaken's strategic partners on that program in the University of Exeter and the UK Department of Health. And it will be to progress the PTSD program. So completion, integration, and execution of the aforementioned R&D programs.
Anthony, I hope you'll keep us posted on any progress with all that. Thank you very much for the update today.
Stephen, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Anthony Tennyson, the CEO of Sylvonis Therapeutics.